Follow along as we celebrate Dungeons & Dragons Online, while not turning a blind eye to its throes of issues. While it has the potential to be revered as the Hall of Wonders, it struggles to rise beyond the reputation of the Blushing Mermaid. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy as we explore the transmutation of Dungeons & Dragons into an MMORPG, and why I think DDO is the bravest MMO ever made. Despite its age, DDO's graphical style supports a rich, engaging world with sprawling dungeons and large explorable zones. Traps lay around every corner, and puzzles that take legitimate effort lie in wait to be solved. Unlike Cryptic's D&D ostensibly based MMO, meaningful choice is at the heart and soul of DDO, enabling you to build the very character you imagine. Additionally, cross-classing opens up a myriad of gameplay styles, and your choice of race transcends cosmetic appearance alone. These are the pillars of classic D&D, and DDO honors them in a noticeable way. You can feel the legacy, the homage, the lineage of titles that came before it. Yet, does DDO sufficiently walk in the dust of their footprints? Other expectations of what constitutes traditional D&D are closer to distinct echoes or faint memories than explicit inspiration. The pull for innovation threatens to tear asunder the fabric of tradition. For example, combat is surprisingly fast-paced for a Dungeons & Dragons-inspired title, a topic to which we'll return later. Yet, it does possess a depth that keeps you thinking and planning. For example, undead have natural damage resistance against slashing weapons. Since damage numbers are reasonably low in comparison to other MMOs, your entire attack could be absorbed by your foe, leaving you functionally stuck. You thus either need to be proficient in another weapon type against which your foe has no resistance, or have the ability to add another damage type to your own weapon. These details keep every mission exciting because you need to prepare accordingly. Still more, those who enjoy visual progression should find that DDO does not disappoint. Even early level armor and weapons are well designed and represent the development of your character without forcing you to spend money to buy attractive equipment. Guild Wars 2. Moreover, effects such as a subtle red glow representing added fire damage are shown on weapons that serve as a reminder not only of its additional properties, yet also as a memento of your journey. Plus, equipment in DDO reminds me of loot in Asheron's Call 1, in which all equipment was procedurally generated. You never know what is waiting for you after a defeated boss or at the end of a dungeon run. However, not all loot is determined by programmatic dice. There are fixed drops that you can plan progression around, much like farming loot in early EverQuest. In this way, DDO's loot system strikes a nice balance between both extremes, since you can both be surprised and relieved that the upgrade you need or the item you want is now yours. But most loot is obtained after boss fights through looting chests, which unfortunately harmonizes with the odd pace of combat. It's not a bad experience, but does it feel Dungeons & Dragons? At least DDO's inventory screen closely resembles the UI in Baldur's Gate. Speaking of Baldur's Gate, you can also multi-class in DDO. If you can think of a playstyle, you can build it. In fact, there are 15 classes to consider, some with optional paths, and more. The point is, if you love theory crafting, DDO is as deep as you can stomach. These are some of the reasons why this player wrote, if you were just rickrolled, subscribe for more MMO content. Moving on. If you are a returning player, Standing Stone Games keeps releasing content updates, challenge leagues, and expansions with no sign of slowing down, even if Lotro seems to receive more attention. Be that as it may, DDO has a surprisingly robust starting experience that holds up well even against more modern MMORPGs. Case in point, the Lazy Peon echoes this sentiment in his 2022 coverage of Dungeons & Dragons Online. Thankfully, playing through Steam is simple, and creating an account takes just a few seconds. But be warned, sometimes the 64-bit client doesn't load, so you may be forced to play on the 32nd. Regardless, pick a server and you're in. The initial loading screen is obviously reminiscent of Lotro's, and this is not the first reference. Also, notice that you can buy access to the Forgotten Realms. Do you even know what Eberron is? Keep these observations in mind. When creating a character, you need to pick a playstyle. You can already sense that the tone is dark, yet grounded. The armor textures still hold up, and the animations are enjoyably smooth. Since I'm keen to play a druid, I select the spell category, even though you'll see why later this categorization is ultimately unhelpful. After selecting your class, you choose your race. This decision is important, and is not cosmetic only. I should add that as Massively OP has already covered, DDO made several once premium races and classes free to all players earlier this year, so there's never been a better time to start than now. Next, you select ability scores, skills, and feats. Instead of rolling dice for your character stats, everyone is given 28 points to invest into attribute points. This is the right choice from a design perspective, because everyone would simply push the reroll button until 28 was rolled. But tabletop D&D was often thrilling because your character was not balanced. The bad dice rolls were important because they forced you to be creative in situations in which your character was not natively adept. But more on this later. Just be sure to invest your points correctly here because respecing is not easily done. Additionally, DDO has an impressive character designer for its age, without being monetized and having an assortment of various sliders, color hues, and visual options. However, the last selection you must pick is your alignment. It innocuously sits under your surname as if it's a setting you can safely overlook. Note the foreshadowing. After creating your character, you see your toon is wearing dirty rags, which sets up the next scene perfectly. After loading in, the game staggers for a second as it builds the initial tutorial. Strangely, this is the only time I perceive this issue occurring, yet this is the absolute worst place to communicate to your players that your engine struggles to load levels. Adding insult to injury are 4 separate text notifications, simultaneously flooding your senses that makes it easy to overlook the otherwise superb narratological setup. Pleasantly though, is the voice acting that adds gravitas to the experience.
Memories of a large white dragon striking your ship come flooding back.
You quickly notice that it's snowing, despite being on the beach of a sunny tropical island, which sets the stage for the main quest of the newbie area. You are taught basic controls such as running and jumping. While some players found them clunky, I personally think they are more grounded than Lotros. Moreover, you are introduced to an initial cast of characters. Jeets, the thieving rogue, is the one who ironically donates a free weapon to you. You'd expect an honorable paladin to function in this role, yet alas. But as a spark that grows into a wildfire, a hardcore NPC is advertised to be near the beach, yet upon investigation is not there. What else will cause our expectations to be broken by neglectful game design? Be that as it may, I run up the hill to join with the other canonical adventurers to investigate the snow. Thus, we look to enter the grotto to continue. The swirls on both sides indicate that the entryway begins a quest area. Subtle yet effective. Moreover, a feature I adore in principle is selecting difficulties for each quest. You enter the cave, which is engrossingly moody and atmospheric. You approach the cleric who is wearing presumably in-game equipment, which foreshadows potential brilliantly. Moreover, in a great design move, her character casts a spell on you that prevents you from dying, even though you can still suffer damage. This is genius because it frees a newbie to take risks and learn the game without feeling like they'll be punished for doing so. Matching player expectation well, it's obvious that the gate ahead is locked and that I'll need to climb the ladder to open it, so I know exactly what I will learn in this situation. But amidst the otherwise excellent introduction, the UI reminds me that I have a daily dice roll. Nothing like retention schemes that immediately remove any sense of immersion. And while the dice is ostensibly D&D inspired, the UI is another reference to Lotro. This association has been further elaborated by Strimtum, so if you are familiar with Standing Stone's other MMO and are curious how DDO compares, watch that video. Moreover, there are glowing insignia on the ground that imply, without explicitly telling me where to go, good use of visual direction. After dropping down the crevice, we now see the lever that presumably will open the gate. Yet, it's guarded by a Sahuagin. Being a druid, I do a druid thing to call my wolf. Since combat is one of the most defining elements of playing D&D in any modality, let's take a closer look. You see that combat is experientially real time. This makes fighting dynamic and tactical. It's reactionary. Time to defeat monsters is relatively quick, so progressing from encounter to encounter is seamless. But does this feel D&D? Many of us, having played through tabletop campaigns, associate D&D with turn-based combat. It's slower, more methodical, and strategic. While the Steam page advertises that DDO features authentic 3.5 gameplay, the manual explicitly highlights round-based combat. Sure, rounds aren't explicitly turns, but they're not synchronous. Individual encounters can take over 10 minutes to complete. Plus, each decision in a round or turn-based system feels impactful because emerging challenges that require creativity to overcome constantly are being created. This distinction is fundamentally important because the constraint of a round-based system functionally causes the sensation of combat to slow down. Thus, combat in tabletop D&D is closer to an RTS than an ARPG. But martial conflict in DDO turns another direction, since it is real-time without a pause button, and because it needs to be balanced to be played solo, the difficulty needs to be easy enough not to cause the player to stop the game to think. Thus, the default experience that is provided to players contains no dilemmas, seemingly purposefully. If there is one defining component of traditional D&D, it is the emphasis of a situation in which there does not seem to be a right answer, yet many wrong ones. Every choice is pregnant with potential, ideally for your benefit, yet with a certain likelihood of complete disaster. It's like defending an armbar in jiu-jitsu only to be attacked with a triangle. This dynamic is what I hinted at earlier regarding imbalance being a source of fun in conventional D&D. If your character has notable weaknesses, they will eventually manifest. However, if all characters are balanced sufficiently to deal with most, if not all encounters, then where's the tension? The creative problem solving. Thus, unlike Baldur's Gate or a conventional tabletop session, DDO does not provide these types of experiences. You rarely feel like you can lose, and defeat is more a function of a player's complete disregard or negligence than clever encounter design. To be fair, in the context in which DDO originally released, this style of combat in the MMO genre was novel. Other than Neocron or World War II Online, there were no other MMOs that supported a real-time action-based combat system. World of Warcraft, EverQuest 2, Guild Wars, and nearly every other competitor use some variant of a tag target system. While admittedly DDO's is still tag target under the hood, and thus closer to Guild Wars 2 in practice, DDO nonetheless innovated a fundamental component of MMO gameplay. While conceptually an impressive feature to set itself apart from the competition, it likewise separated itself from expected D&D norms. This is one reason why I think DDO is the bravest MMO ever made. Hear me out. Turbine, now Standing Stone Games, had a seemingly impossible task of converting a single-player, pause-based RPG or an in-person collaborative round-based experience into an online format that could be soloed. It's one degree of difficulty to base an MMORPG around a single unit from an RTS like Warhammer Online. Yet it's another to stay so close to the original formula, yet change just enough to generate dissonance. It's like playing octaves on an instrument, only to detune one of them a quarter step. A fan loyal to Dr. Pepper would immediately notice the difference if given Mr. Pibb. But we will see that combat does contain redeeming qualities. After defeating the evolutionarily advanced humanoid fish, we pull the lever to be joined with our comrades. Jeet, instead of giving us another weapon, instead flirts with the cleric, which is far more fitting behavior for a rogue. Inside lay an empty room, until we find ourselves the target of an ambush. Damage numbers are low, which makes it easy to discern your performance in combat. You roll a virtual die each time you attack, whose results are rendered to the right. It is not particularly clear what contributes to the modifiers listed below the roll, yet the result is shown to the left. Of course, flanking, proficiency, whether you're moving, and buffs, debuffs contribute to this sum. Combat is quick and frantic. Its chaotic energy does remind the player of conventional D&D, yet the impact of each swing feels less important, namely because there are so many of them and each one contributes relatively little to the fight. After the fish are defeated, you swim down into a pool, loot a key inside a submerged chest, and open a door into a room full of shrines. Instead of resting indiscriminately in DDO, you have to progress sufficiently far into a dungeon to access these. They replenish HP, spell points, another departure from 3.5, and allow you to change the spells you memorized. I had no idea my druid already knew so many abilities, and thankfully the spellbook slots are immediately underneath the selection pool. Good UI design. Time to test these out. Our party reaches another gate, protecting a high priestess. Under its HP bar is a CR, or combat rating number, that corresponds to the foe's difficulty. It's functionally the creature's level without calling it that. Its usefulness is as impactful here as it was in 3.5. You can see that spellcasting is not particularly intuitive. It's difficult to target a foe while casting magic, and even when a spell lands, it's hardly more effective than swinging a blade, so I opt for the simpler fighting style. Another gamer experienced this same predicament, noting that magic is a bit more difficult to get used to than melee. This is also what I meant earlier by druids being unhelpfully categorized primarily as being a spellcaster. It's vastly simpler, more intuitive, and arguably effective for them to function as a fighter with some spells than a conventional tree hugger. Regardless, I run up to open the chest. This is the primary way of obtaining loot. While I do enjoy earning rewards as a result of defeating a boss, prohibiting access to loot except primarily through chests does not feel like D&D. Moreover, you can pay premium currency to re-roll the chest. That's why you can only get loot this way. Regardless, a ring that enables you to breathe underwater is cool, and the other rewards signal your development as your class, with proper clothing. The last section highlights the use of skills. Remember investing points into them during character creation? By using Search, my character can notice a secret passage. Before we leave, we are instructed to talk to the cleric, who can provide us with an upgraded weapon. This came as a surprise, since I presumed all the rewards were handled via the chest. Yet you'll soon see why this moment is ultimately the result of game developer negligence. But it does represent that you can also earn gear through completing quests. You step into Karthos village, in which many NPCs wait to recruit you to solve their problems. Towns are shared zones between players, so DDO's multiplayer system is quite close to Guild Wars 1. Additionally, class trainers are in towns. Each class has 3 enhancement bars, and you can, if you qualify, multi-class into 2 additional classes, providing 6 additional specs into which you could potentially invest. I admire their attempt to honor the build crafting potential of earlier incarnations of D&D. This is a main reason why, despite its flaws, DDO is worth playing. Just be sure to plan your build ahead of time, because once I tried to cross-class into a monk, I learned that my alignment was incorrect. Thus, this complexity comes at a cost, a point to which we'll return later. Regardless, continuing the tutorial. When you enter the Hayton family crypt, you're able to select various difficulties, yet the ones that potentially would feel like D&D in terms of having a reasonable challenge are blocked. You either have to repeatedly run the same instance to unlock the higher tiers or pay for a membership. I understand that a game has to make money, but keeping the most enjoyable bits hidden behind a paywall ensures that most free-to-play players never experience it, and thus never upgrade, falsely thinking that the easy mode is the de facto experience. This is disappointing because there are half a dozen expansions worth of content to enjoy. Yet if the starting experience does not sufficiently set the hook, then the developers won't reel in a catch. Moreover, the designers failed to test the actual speed at which players would move through content. Listen to this.
And by the passage leading strange.
The voice acting is pleasant and appropriate, yet the magic is warded off due to poor pacing. Yet, as we make our way through the crypt, we are presented with... Wait. Another redundant tutorial? We already know how to do all of these actions because you literally just taught us. DDO suffers from the double tutorial problem. This happens when developers later realize that they can improve the new player experience, so they create an even newer tutorial than the one with which the game shipped. The problem is that they do not remove the second, superfluous, and worse successor. Lotro, Fallen Earth, and Wagfu also suffer from the same problem. Remember developer negligence hinted at earlier? In this crypt, we are presented with a reward for opening a chest. A rusty sword. This so-called reward only makes sense if we had no weapon. Yet, we were already provided with at least 2 from the introductory adventure. While it admittedly serves as a springboard into damage types and resistances, this is a second-order problem, originating from introducing a better tutorial without updating systems downstream. In fact, seeing this weapon breaks the player's assumption that an even better sword should be given here as a reward. This shock not only breaks Starklock's second law of game design, yet also shatters players' trust, since we now have mixed feedback as to when we can expect an actual upgrade. But, to be fair, this crypt better showcases puzzles than the introductory cave. The boss arena is protected by 3 runes, each of which is obtained by respectively clearing 3 rooms. The linear logic here expands in later levels, requiring 2D and even 3D puzzles to be solved. These were legitimately difficult, and completing them was meaningful. As expected, most quests on Karthos are of a similar kind. Accept a quest, enter the instance, kill stuff, open quests, maybe solve a puzzle, rinse and repeat. Unfortunately, as Karthos does a good job representing the general gameplay of DDO, it also foreshadows the pestering nearness of its ever-encroaching item shop. Just like paying for more daily dice rolls or redoing the loot of a chest, there are many opportunities to spend real money beyond a mere membership. I personally find item shops of all types loathsome, unless all gameplay activities in their fullness are truly accessible easily via free-to-play options. Yet, if you want to level up faster, stronger, and more effectively, you can skip the entire D&D fantasy of adventure and buy your way to progress. In fact, in Korthos, there are quests that teach you how to use the item shop without giving you any currency for free. In fact, unlike Lotro, I did not come across a source of free premium currencies anywhere, so its monetization scheme appears even more aggressive. But you don't have to spend money to complete the main quest in Korthos. The final adventure to solve the Sand Snow Enigma is compelling, as you must chase an imposing dragon through an ice cave before it battles against a mind flayer. As the last task of the newbie island, the setup feels distinctly Dungeons and Dragons. Dragons and mind flayers? What could be more quintessential? Once you're finished, you travel to Stormreach in Eberron. Wait, where? And this expectation-jarring issue represents the crux of the video. Unless you are this guy, who already felt fondly about D&D turned pseudo-steampunk. More players would expect the setting to take place within the Sword Coast. Note, I'm not critiquing Eberron as a setting, yet highlighting the delta between probable player expectation and actual gameplay. Instead of combat feeling strategic, it is closer to an action RPG. In lieu of being in Faerun, the most iconic D&D location imaginable, DDO is set in a relatively unknown place within Forgotten Realms lore. These design decisions were risky. Tampering with an already established and tried and true D&D formula took guts, bravery even. But major changes to the D&D recipe seldom succeed. Remember Sword Coast Legends? Dark Alliance? Or what about Neverwinter, the other D&D inspired MMO? While it has more concurrent players than DDO, it's as close to Dungeons and Dragons as Velveeta is to cheese. Or consider that even older online versions of D&D exist, which outperform DDO. Aerolith in particular comes to mind, that hosts thousands of unique players every month. To be fair to DDO, however, there is still a very loyal player base. People are still actively playing DDO, yet why has it fallen into relative obscurity? In corroboration with Narc's coverage that also identified significant problems, there is a churning cauldron of issues. Beyond the examples already given, DDO's complexity is a double-edged sword. While DDO celebrates player choice by theoretically enabling us to build the very character of our imagination, we are in fact imprisoned into a rigid structure of adherence. If you do not upgrade your character in a particular way at a precise moment in time, in perfect alignment with your prior choices, then your vision may not be achieved, forcing you to start entirely over. This inability to fix a mistake as a result of innocent ignorance or mere lack of experience breaks an iconic design rule of Rolf Koster. In fact, DDO breaks 2 of the 4 canonical guidelines of MMO design philosophy. Now, one could argue that ruining a character build is a classic D&D milestone, yet this rebut misses the forest for the trees. While DDO does help forecast build possibilities to the player via talent trees, you cannot easily view feat progression unless you dig through layers of menus and toggle them specifically. We know that it's possible to have a complex, even complicated game while communicating progression options clearly. Look generally at the ARPG genre. Yet, particularly in DDO's case, there are a handful of player-made character planners available. If DDO made it easier to plan your build, these would not be necessary. As an aside, I realize that Path of Exile and Grim Dawn both have character planners built by players. Yet the important difference is that they both use the same in-game visualization designed by the developers. Solutions for DDO completely reimagine the visual arrangement to guide the planner. Another issue is that crafting in DDO takes the award for the most obtuse, yet equally useless system I have ever encountered, and I've been playing MMOs since pre-Kunark EverQuest. For example, you do not directly harvest materials, so it is not intuitive as to when you have enough reagents to craft. As far as my experience went, you cannot create items, yet only deconstruct or enhance a pre-existing drop. You need very specific vendor-sold components that of course are highlighted in the crafting screen to be purchased via the item shop. It doesn't help that there is next to no utility for crafting early on and feels mostly like a time and money sink for a newbie. I personally love conceptually deep crafting MMOs. Swig, Rhizome, and arguably BDO come to mind as triumphs in this category. But DDO keeps the complication without the pedagogy, much like someone trying to read classical Latin for the first time, although only knowing English. It's deceptively familiar, yet distinctly alien. Another problem plaguing DDO is that of hotbar bloat. What at first seems to be a positive, quickly manifests as a problem. While having many abilities, spells, and item powers is initially fun, you amass so many, so quickly, that the few unique fade into a sea of ordinary. Too many actions ends up selecting for the few that are impactful, which works against the point of having many choices to begin with. Unlike EverQuest or Guild Wars 1 that inherently limit your choices in combat as to both reduce cognitive load while protecting the utility of each ability, in DDO you have total access to your entire kit. This could be a strength. Consider that BDO expects you to memorize an ability to a hotkey, of which each class has dozens of abilities, and some of which have conditional prerequisites. While their screen is bloated with other distractions, giant rows of hotbars is not one of them. Last yet not least are the cut corners. This sounds like an odd item to highlight, so let me explain. The animations are enjoyably fluid unless you have shapeshifted and climb a ladder or turn a lever. Or the sound design is compelling unless you have paws yet are cantering across a wooden bridge. If attention to detail is going to be spent attempting to recreate one of the most popular fantasy universes to exist, why not flesh out the world with all of its wonder? These are the little details captured by Neverwinter Nights 1, and is a reason why thousands of players still join its multiplayer worlds. While it may sound like I'm simply listing an array of gameplay issues, consider what typical issues someone would remember when playing canonical Dungeons & Dragons. They are quite dissimilar in type. Typically, they're player-related, disruptive personalities or harsh rule sets. The latter finds expression in Baldur's Gate. Faerun can be unforgiving and ruthless. Yet DDO suffers from an entirely different set of problems, one that do not remind someone of D&D. If it had in fact a world in which other players' choices mattered, or a landscape that threatened each adventurer at every corner, then perhaps locations like the Bone Bite Hideout would remind us of Nashkeel Mines. Thus, while not an exhaustive list, these representative examples contribute to why DDO is only a home to a few instead of the many. Yet, for all of its issues, it admittedly feels more D&D than Neverwinter, a comparison that has also drawn the attention of GG Reloaded, whose video explores this very question. So, people can and do overlook these problems. The community that continues playing is loyal, dedicated, and enthusiastic to share their experience and knowledge with those who may call DDO their home. Even this negative review has to admit that there are amazing players still enjoying this virtualization of Eberron. Thus, while I admire DDO's attempt at innovation and its chancy risk-taking, mac and cheese stops being enticing when its noodles are made of oats and the cheese from almonds. Okay, this meal would still technically be mac and cheese, but in name only. This is why DDO is the bravest MMO ever made. Do I recommend DDO? It depends. As a free-to-play solo player, I think your experience would mirror rowing a 12-man racing boat alone. However, if you have a group of friends who are willing to look past the relics of game design experiments from nearly 20 years ago, become VIP for more difficult content, and play together as the game was intended, I think there would be much to enjoy. So, since it's free, there's no harm in installing, trying it out, and seeing for yourself if it's worth additional time or money. If you are keen on having a deeper dive into the newbie experience of DDO, I recommend Super Bits and Bob's introductory video that thoughtfully covers the entire newbie experience. Now, if you are still listening, then you would likely enjoy my other videos covering MMO content, so hit the subscribe button. Let me know your thoughts, your opinions of DDO in the comments, especially if you disagree or see the matter differently than me. Until next time, remember to gather your party before venturing forth.